The plan was flawlessly brutal. Snatch the cartel heir's beautiful bride minutes before the wedding. But when the burlap sack was yanked from her head in a damp basement, the woman trembling in the oversized white robe wasn't the pristine prize. She was the heavy, overlooked sister. And she was completely covered in jagged, terrifying scars. The bridal suite smelled faintly of hairspray, expensive champagne, and frantic panic. Maeve knelt on the plush carpet, a mouthful of pins clamped between her teeth. She was sweating. The air conditioning in the penthouse was broken, and the heavy maroon bridesmaid dress she wore clung to her thick thighs and pinched her ribs. Above her stood Chloe, radiant, thin, and vibrating with nervous energy. Chloe was complaining about the lace on her bodice. Maeve was just trying to fix the hem so her sister wouldn't trip down the aisle into the arms of Gideon Blake, a man who owned half the city's shipping ports and most of its judges. "It's uneven, Maeve," Chloe whined, staring into the floor-to-ceiling mirror. "You're making it uneven." "Stand still," Maeve mumbled around the pins. She felt invisible. She always did. At £240, Maeve was the family's sturdy background furniture. The reliable one. The one who didn't fit into the designer samples. The one who handled the logistics while Chloe handled the cameras. Then the heavy oak door of the suite didn't just open. It splintered. Wood shrapnel exploded across the room. Chloe screamed. Maeve dropped the pins, freezing on her knees. 3 men poured into the room, dressed in tactical black, smelling of damp wool and gun oil. They moved with terrifying, practiced efficiency. One grabbed Chloe, clamping a gloved hand over her mouth, but he slipped on the spilled champagne. Chloe bit him, thrashing violently, and darted toward the adjoining bathroom, slamming the door and sliding the heavy deadbolt. "Grab the bride, we have 60 seconds!" A voice barked from the hallway. Maeve tried to stand, her heavy frame clumsy in the restricting maroon dress. She had a white satin robe thrown over her shoulders, a gift from Chloe that read "Bride Squad" on the back, though the men didn't stop to read the fine print. A hand tangled in Maeve's dark hair, rough canvas scraped against her face. The world went black. She couldn't breathe. The smell of burlap and stale tobacco filled her lungs. She was hoisted off her feet, a broad shoulder digging painfully into her stomach. She kicked, her sensible flat shoes connecting with a shin. The man grunted, tightening his grip on her thighs, and then she was moving. Down a hallway, down a stairwell. The jarring rhythm of his descent knocked the wind out of her. "Got her. Let's move," a voice echoed through the fabric. She was tossed like a sack of wet cement onto the ribbed metal floor of a vehicle. Doors slammed. Tires shrieked. Maeve curled into a tight ball in the pitch dark. Her heart hammered a frantic, irregular beat against her ribs. She didn't pray. She didn't bargain with a higher power. Instead, a cynical, detached part of her brain calculated the odds of survival. Gideon Blake's enemies were legion. They wanted his bride as a bargaining chip. When they realized they had the fat, unremarkable sister instead, they wouldn't negotiate. They would just put a bullet in her head and throw her in the river. It was simple economics. The ride lasted 40 agonizing minutes. Every pothole jolted her spine. Her wrists were yanked behind her back, tight plastic zip ties biting into her skin, cutting off the circulation. Her fingers grew cold and numb. Finally, the van jerked to a halt. The back doors groaned open, letting in a draft of cold, brine-scented air. Docks. They were near the water. Rough hands hauled her upright. Her knees buckled, but someone caught her by the elbows, dragging her forward. Her shoes scuffed against uneven concrete. The air here smelled of rust, old fish, and wet dust. "Put her in the chair," a deep, quiet voice ordered. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. The voice possessed a heavy, gravitational pull that made the other men move faster. Maeve was shoved into a hard wooden chair. Someone pulled her arms back, binding them to the chair's spindles. "Take off the hood." The quiet voice again. The burlap was snatched away. The sudden assault of harsh, fluorescent overhead lights felt like needles in Maeve's eyes. She blinked rapidly, her breath hitching, trying to bring the room into focus. It was an abandoned warehouse. Dust motes danced in the stark lighting. 3 men stood near the door, assault rifles slung casually over their chests. But it was the man standing directly in front of her that commanded the room. Declan Hayes. Maeve recognized him from the whispered, terrified conversations in her father's study. Declan was the ghost of the North Side. He was tall, built like a longshoreman, but wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. His face was a map of hard lines, sharp angles, and a cold, flat stare that could freeze blood. Declan stepped closer, pulling a silver lighter from his pocket. He flipped it open, the metallic clink echoing in the vast space, and lit a cigarette. He took a slow drag, his dark eyes finally dropping to look at his captive. The smoke froze in his lungs. His eyes narrowed. The flat, dead expression cracked, replaced by a dark, simmering fury. He looked at her round face, flushed and streaked with sweat. He looked at her heavy arms, her thick waist, the maroon dress bunched up awkwardly around her knees. He slowly turned his head to look at the man who had carried her in. "Finn," Declan said. The silence that followed was heavier than the air in the room. "Yeah, boss." Finn stepped forward, puffing his chest slightly. "We got her, just like you said. Snatched her right out of the suite." Declan turned back to Maeve. He leaned in close. He smelled of peppermint, tobacco, and violence. "What is your name?" he asked her softly. Maeve swallowed. Her throat was sandpaper. "Maeve. Maeve Collins." Declan straightened up. He didn't yell. He didn't throw a tantrum. He simply looked at Finn, his voice dropping an octave. "Finn, you absolute idiot! You kidnapped the wrong sister!" Panic erupted among the men. Finn cursed, pacing the floor, running a hand over his buzzed scalp. "She was wearing the white robe, boss. She was in the middle of the room. The other one ran into the bathroom." "So you grabbed the one fixing the hem instead of kicking the door down," Declan stated, his tone devoid of inflection. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Gideon isn't going to trade a single shipping container for the sister. He doesn't even like her family." Maeve sat perfectly still. Every word was a confirmation of her own internal logic. She was worthless currency in this world. Should I put a silencer on?" Finn asked, nodding toward Maeve. "We can dump her in the bay, cut our losses, hit Gideon another way." Maeve closed her eyes. Here it is, she thought. The end. She didn't feel a grand, cinematic terror. She just felt deeply, profoundly tired. Tired of the dress, tired of the tight zip ties, tired of a lifetime spent apologizing for taking up space. "Shut up," Declan snapped. He walked around the chair, his heavy footsteps circling her like a predator assessing a wounded animal. He stopped behind her. Maeve felt the cold steel of a blade slide against her wrists. With a sharp snap, the zip ties broke. "Stand up," Declan ordered. Maeve brought her numb, tingling hands to her lap. She pushed herself up on shaky legs. She was nearly 6 feet tall, a big woman in every sense. But standing next to Declan, she felt entirely defenseless. "Take the coat off," he said, gesturing to the white satin bride squad robe still clinging to her shoulders. Maeve frowned, her heart kicking up a new, frantic rhythm. "What?" "Take it off. Gideon uses micro-trackers. He sews them into hems, collars, anywhere his people go. I need to make sure you aren't broadcasting our coordinates to a heavily armed hit squad right now." "I don't have a tracker on me," she said, her voice shaking for the first time. "I don't care what you think you have. Take the robe off and strip the dress to the waist." Maeve's blood ran cold. The request wasn't sexual. Declan's eyes were entirely clinical. But the humiliation was physical. She hated her body. She had spent 28 years trying to hide it under loose cardigans, empire waists, and dark colors. The thought of standing half-naked under fluorescent lights in front of a room of armed men made bile rise in her throat. "Please," she whispered. The word tasted metallic. "Please don't." Declan stepped into her space. He was close enough that she could see the faint grey flecks in his dark eyes. "I am not asking, Maeve. Either you do it, or Finn does it." Maeve looked at Finn. He looked eager to make up for his mistake. Her hands trembled as she reached for the knot of the white robe. She untied it, letting the slippery fabric fall to the dirty concrete floor. She was left in the tight, maroon bridesmaid dress. It had a side zipper. She reached under her left arm. The zipper stuck. Her fingers were still clumsy from the zip ties. She yanked it, a small sob of frustration escaping her lips. Declan reached out and swatted her hands away. He gripped the zipper and pulled it down in one smooth, aggressive motion. "Slip the straps down," he commanded. Maeve closed her eyes tight, tears finally squeezing past her lashes. She pushed the heavy satin straps off her thick shoulders. The top of the dress fell to her waist. She was left standing in a plain, functional black bra, her pale skin exposed to the freezing air of the warehouse. She wrapped her arms around her torso, trying to cover her stomach, trying to hide. "Arms down," Declan said. She shook her head. "No." Declan grabbed her wrists. He wasn't gentle, but he wasn't trying to break her bones either. He pulled her arms away from her body and pinned them to her sides. He began his visual sweep, looking for the tiny blinking light or the hard lump of a sewn-in tracker. But his eyes stopped on her ribs. The silence in the room changed. It wasn't the tense silence of waiting for an execution. It was the heavy, breathless silence of shock, covering the entire left side of Maeve's torso, starting from her ribs and wrapping violently down around her thick stomach and hip, was a massive network of scars. They were puckered, angry, and deep, thick roped tissue that looked like melted wax poured over raw earth. It was the undeniable aftermath of extreme, prolonged agony. Third-degree burns that had taken years to heal, pulling the skin tight and uneven. Declan stared. He had seen violence. He had inflicted it. But this was different. This wasn't a bullet hole or a clean knife wound. This was survival. He slowly let go of her wrists. "What happened to you?" he asked. The cold edge in his voice was completely gone, replaced by a rough, quiet intensity. Maeve pulled her arms back across her stomach, her cheeks burning with shame. "Car crash. When I was 16. A fire," Declan observed, his eyes tracing the edge of the scar tissue just above her hip. "My sister was trapped in the passenger seat," Maeve said, staring at the floor. "I pulled her out. The gas tank caught before I could get myself clear." Declan looked at her face, the flush of humiliation, the tears she was fighting so hard to hold back. He thought about the beautiful, unblemished bride fixing her hair in a penthouse suite, while this woman carried the physical cost of her life. He thought about a family willing to trade her away, and a fiancé who wouldn't pay a dime to get her back. He reached down, picked up the white satin robe from the floor, and gently draped it back over her shoulders. "Boss," Finn interrupted, shifting uncomfortably. "What's the play? We dumping her?" Declan didn't look at Finn. His eyes remained locked on Maeve. He saw the way she braced herself for the answer. He saw the sheer, undeniable grit it took for her to just stand there. "No," Declan said softly, pulling the lapels of the robe together over her chest. We're keeping her. The room they locked her in didn't look like a cell, but the heavy steel deadbolt clicking into place on the outside told the true story. It was a spare bedroom in what felt like an old, reinforced brownstone. The walls were painted a dull utilitarian grey. The bed was large, covered in a thick navy quilt. There were no windows, only an air vent high up near the ceiling that hummed a steady, monotonous tune. Maeve sat on the edge of the mattress. She hadn't bothered to pull the quilt back. She was still wearing the maroon bridesmaid dress, though the zipper was pulled up as far as her clumsy, cold fingers could manage, and she kept Chloe's white satin robe wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She stared at the blank wall opposite the bed. 2 hours had passed since the warehouse. Maybe 3. Time was losing its shape. The lock clicked. Heavy tumblers ground together. Maeve tensed, her hands instinctively gripping the edge of the mattress. The door swung open and Declan Hayes walked in. He had shed the suit jacket. His white dress shirt had the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faded ink. He carried a plastic shopping bag in one hand and a styrofoam takeout container in the other. He didn't speak immediately. He set the food on a small wooden desk in the corner, then tossed the plastic bag onto the foot of the bed. "Change," Declan said. His voice was rough, tired. "I had Finn run to a big box store on the edge of the territory. I don't know your exact size. I told him to err on the side of caution." Maeve looked at the bag. She didn't reach for it. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're shivering, and that dress looks like a medieval torture device." "I mean keeping me," Maeve clarified, her voice flat, devoid of the panic she had felt in the warehouse. The adrenaline crash had left her feeling hollowed out. "You saw the scars. You know I pulled Chloe out of that car. My father spent $300,000 on plastic surgery to fix a hairline fracture on Chloe's cheekbone. He bought me a gym membership and a therapist to deal with the trauma. They don't care about me, Mr. Hayes. Gideon certainly doesn't. I am zero leverage." Declan pulled out the single wooden chair from beneath the desk, turned it around, and sat, crossing his arms over the backrest. He watched her with that same unsettling, clinical intensity. "Declan," he corrected quietly. "And you're right. You aren't leverage." Maeve let out a short, bitter laugh. "So I'm what? A stray dog you couldn't bring yourself to put down?" "Eat the food, Maeve." She finally looked at the takeout box. The smell of roasted garlic and heavily seasoned meat drifted through the room. Her stomach gave a violent, painful cramp. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Brides didn't allow their squads to bloat before the photos. She stood up, her joints popping in the quiet room. She walked to the desk, opened the container, and found a massive portion of lamb and rice from a street vendor. A plastic fork was jammed into the side. She took a bite. It was hot, salty, and incredibly greasy. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. Declan watched her eat. He didn't look away when she dropped a piece of rice on the robe, nor did he flinch when she ate with the rapid, unself-conscious hunger of someone starving. "I made a call," Declan said, breaking the silence. "To a contact inside Gideon's camp. I wanted to see how he was playing the extraction." Maeve paused, the plastic fork hovering halfway to her mouth. She swallowed heavily. "And he told the guests there was a security threat. He evacuated Chloe to his private estate." Declan's jaw tightened. A muscle leapt beneath the skin of his cheek. "He told the police that during the chaos, one of the bridesmaids went missing. He didn't even use your name, Maeve. He issued a statement to the press 10 minutes ago. He called you a tragic casualty of a city plagued by gang violence." Maeve set the fork down. The lamb suddenly tasted like ash. A tragic casualty. They had already buried her. In less than 4 hours, her family and her future brother-in-law had calculated the PR angles, cut their losses, and used her disappearance to boost Gideon's tough-on-crime political narrative. She wasn't a missing person. She was a talking point. "I see," Maeve whispered. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She didn't cry. The well was completely dry. Declan stood up. He walked over to her, his large frame dwarfing her, but he didn't crowd her space. "They threw you away," he said, the words low and heavy. "A woman who walked through fire for them. They threw you to the wolves without blinking." "I told you," Maeve said, looking up at him, her cynical mask firmly in place. "I'm the fat, ugly sister. I'm bad for the brand. This is a clean break for them." Declan reached out. Maeve flinched, but he only brushed a stray, tangled lock of dark hair behind her ear. His fingers were calloused and warm. "They are fools," Declan said softly. "They look at you and see a liability. I look at those scars, and I see the only person in that penthouse who actually knows how to survive." He stepped back, gesturing to the plastic bag on the bed. "Eat. Change. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, everything changes." The attack came at 3 a.m. Maeve was asleep, wrapped in the oversized grey sweatpants and heavy black hoodie Finn had bought. It was the first time in a decade she hadn't felt restricted by her clothes. The explosion rattled the fillings in her teeth. Dust rained from the ceiling. The humming air vent shrieked and died. The heavy deadbolt on her door didn't unlock. The frame simply blew inward, splintering in a cloud of plaster and wood. Maeve rolled off the mattress, hitting the hardwood floor hard. Her heavy body absorbed the impact, bruising her shoulder. But she didn't make a sound. She scrambled under the heavy oak desk, pulling her knees to her chest. Gunfire erupted downstairs. It was a chaotic, deafening rhythm. The pop of handguns mixed with the heavy, rhythmic thud of automatic weapons. Someone screamed. Footsteps thundered up the stairwell. A shadow filled her shattered doorway. "Maeve!" It was Declan. He was covered in drywall dust. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly across the left shoulder of his white shirt. He held a matte black pistol in his right hand. "Get up!" he barked. She crawled out from under the desk, her bare feet slipping on the plaster debris. "What's happening?" "Gideon didn't come for you," Declan said, grabbing her uninjured shoulder and shoving her toward the back hallway. "He tracked the van. He's using your kidnapping as the excuse to wipe out my northern safehouse. He thinks he can decapitate my crew and play the grieving hero all in one night." "He's trying to kill you," she realized, running alongside him. "He's trying to kill everyone in this building, including the tragic casualty." They hit the back stairs. The air was thick with the acrid smell of sulfur and smoke. Finn was at the bottom landing, laying down suppressive fire through a shattered kitchen window. Declan stumbled. His knee buckled, and he hit the wall hard, a harsh grunt tearing from his throat. The blood stain on his shoulder had doubled in size. Maeve didn't panic. Panic was for people who believed someone was coming to save them. Maeve knew better. She grabbed Declan by his good arm, wrapping it over her broad shoulders. She was strong, carrying heavy boxes, moving furniture, pulling a screaming, thrashing sister from a burning car. Maeve knew how to use her weight. "Move," she grunted, bearing his weight. "I can walk," he snarled, trying to pull away. "Shut up and lean on me," she snapped back. "If you bleed out in this hallway, I'm dead anyway." Declan looked at her. Her face was set in a mask of pure, stubborn grit. He nodded once, pressing his weight into her side. Together they navigated the smoke-filled kitchen. Finn threw a smoke grenade out the window, shouting, "Clear the garage, go!" They burst through the heavy fire door into the attached garage. 2 black SUVs sat idling, the remaining crew piling in. Maeve shoved Declan into the back seat of the first vehicle, climbing in right behind him. The doors slammed shut, and the SUV tore out of the garage, smashing through the wooden door and peeling into the rainy night. Inside the dark cab, the only sound was the harsh breathing of the men and the squeal of the tires. Declan slumped against the leather seat, his breathing shallow. He dropped the gun to the floorboard and pressed his hand against his shoulder. Blood seeped through his fingers. Maeve moved without asking permission. She unzipped the oversized hoodie, pulled it off, and grabbed the hem of the plain white t-shirt underneath. She ripped it violently. It wouldn't tear. "Knife!" she demanded, holding her hand out to Finn in the front seat. Finn handed a tactical blade over the console. Maeve sawed a massive strip off her shirt, exposing the thick, scarred flesh of her lower stomach. She didn't care. She leaned over Declan, pushing his hand away. "Press your back into the seat," she ordered. She packed the balled-up fabric directly into the exit wound on his shoulder, tying a longer strip tightly under his armpit to hold it in place. She applied brutal, unyielding pressure with both of her hands. Declan hissed, his head falling back against the headrest. He looked at her through half-closed eyes. The harsh street lights strobed across her face, illuminating the sweat on her brow and the fierce, unyielding set of her jaw. "You're good at this," he rasped, his voice tight with pain. "I had a lot of surgeries," she replied evenly, not lessening the pressure. "You learn how to stop the bleeding, or you die." Declan reached up with his good hand. He didn't push her away. Instead, his blood-stained fingers wrapped gently around her wrist. "Gideon thinks he won tonight," Declan said, the flat, cold authority returning to his voice, despite the blood loss. "He thinks he erased you." "He did," Maeve said bitterly. "No." Declan's grip on her wrist tightened. His dark eyes locked onto hers, burning with a ferocious, possessive heat. "Gideon Blake threw away a queen because he only wanted a pawn. You aren't collateral anymore, Maeve. You aren't a hostage." "Then what am I?" she challenged, her voice trembling slightly under the weight of his stare. "You're mine," Declan promised, the vow echoing in the quiet of the fleeing car. "And we are going to burn his whole empire to the ground. If you loved this intense, action-packed twist between Maeve and Declan, make sure to hit that like button and share this story with a fellow Mafia romance fan. Will Declan survive his injuries? And how will Maeve exact her revenge on the family that abandoned her? Subscribe and turn on notifications to catch the next thrilling updates. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Declan's ultimate vow. Is he her savior, or just a new kind of dangerous?